I believe with a perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach. That is what Zusha is singing. What a great song. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's Sunday night. Let's learn some Talmud. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get it going on the third night of 2021? Yehudit, Sobel in Florence, South Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Stephen in Dover, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Sedona, James in Indianapolis, Pauline in Arkansas, Chris Castile in Louisiana, Renee says, Indy in the house, Ani Mamin. Anne in Merced, Lois in Maryland, Jonathan Hain in the Twin Cities, Nancy in North Carolina, Christo in Lubbock. Chris Castile says, I tuned in live for the first time yesterday, and I enjoyed the explanation as I'm Christian and not Jewish and not familiar with the Talmud. Welcome back, Chris. And Christo says, hope all of you are doing well this evening. Over there on the YouTube side, Sheila in from Montana, Lindsay loves Zusha in Cincinnati, and Charles with us from Texas. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's show is dedicated by my good friend David Sachs here in Los Angeles. Dave is a hilarious television writer who's on The Simpsons for years, and also a deep, deep student of Torah and a great teacher of Torah. Torah on iTunes, I believe, is his podcast, and he's a regular contributor to our Table for Five. He's dedicating tonight's show to Avraham Eitz Chaim ben Devorah for Refuah Shlema. May Avraham Eitz Chaim ben Devorah have a complete healing, and may it be speedy, and we say amen. And may, David, you and your family be showered with blessings. Thank you so much for dedicating tonight's episode, and we say amen. Also, Alan Haney is dedicating in memory of Elaine Haney, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, Heine, Hain or Haney, Haina, I'm sorry, but my heart is in the right place. That Elaine, her neshama should have a great aliyah, her soul should have a great elevation in the world of souls, and may the merit of our learning tonight in her honor carry her even higher in that world. And you, Alan, and your family, may you be showered in blessings, and we say amen. Okay. Let's get into it. Where are we holding? This is page Mem Gimel, page 43. Let me turn that to me. Page 43 here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Passover. We are in chapter 3 and continuing our discussion of the first Mishna in chapter 3. And the subject of our Mishnah is substances that we might not have thought would be chametz. We might not have thought of them as leavened products, but they are, and therefore they're prohibited on Passover. And as we started to discuss, they're prohibited, but they're not full-fledged chametz. And so, as the Mishnah has told us, if you consume these or own these products, because some of them are not even food, you are violating a prohibition of the Torah, but it's not the prohibition on eating chametz itself. So you're not subject to karis, death at the hands of the heavenly court. And we've defined that a bunch of times, but today there's a note where we'll define that more precisely. But you are violating a Torah prohibition, and so the punishment would be lashes if you were warned properly and tried before a beis din, a rabbinic court. All right, we pick it up here at the bottom of page 42b, the very bottom. And tonight, we're basically going to do just about the whole page. Very often I pick and choose. I take concepts that I think are right for this class. We go in deep. I explain things and, sometimes go on a digression that makes sense to teach. We rarely just read a whole page. But this page kind of lends itself to it. And also, there's enough people in the class who've really been here a lot that we can just go with the rabbinic flow, as it were. So let's see how it goes. If you've got questions and comments, just put them in the comments along the way, and I will get to them at the end. We always save some time at the end of class to answer your questions and comments that Nina passes to me through the miracle of the digital fiber. All right, here we go. It is stated in the Mishna that we're discussing that Rabbi Eliezer says that women's adornments are also prohibited as leavened food. It's like, what? How could women's adornments be prohibited on Passover as chametz, as leavened food? The Gemara asks, could it enter your mind to say that adornments made of silver, gold, or woven materials contain leaven, a grain that has come into contact with water and had time to rise like a leavened bread? Rather, say instead that this means even women's cosmetics or other items used by women to enhance their skin are prohibited if they contain leavened ingredients. So in Talmudic times, there were certain women's, body care, skin care products that contained one of the 5 grains, wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats, coming into contact with water. And even though they were just using it on their skin, the fact is, if they were owning, some kind of grain mixed with water for an extended amount of time, that's going to become leavened, and that's prohibited for us to own. It's prohibited to be seen among us and to be possessed by us, by the Jewish people during Passover. So as Rav Yehuda said, the Jewish women who reached physical maturity, but had not yet reached the age of majority, and women who sought to remove hair for cosmetic purposes, they would smear daughters of the poor with lime. So this is to remove unwanted body hair. And they would smear daughters of the wealthy with fine flour. And they would smear daughters of kings with shemen hamor, as it was stated, for so were the days of their anointing filled, 6 months with shemen hamor. Shemen is oil, so this is like a fine beauty product. This is referenced in the book of Esther, that when Esther was taken into the harem, as it were, of Achashverosh in the book of Esther, she was prepared for 6 months before she had her one-night audition with the king, as it were. And these, hundreds and hundreds of other women had the one night and then went to the other harem for the women who've had one night. But Esther somehow passed the audition and became the queen. At any rate, what we're learning here is that there were sort of 3, castes of women using skincare products. The poor women would use some kind of a lime compound to remove hair. Wealthy women would make a paste with flour and water, a very fine flour. And the super rich, the royalty, they had some other kind of a product made out of oil. The Gemara asks, what is this oil product? What is this shemen hamor? Rav Huna bar Chiya said, it is setaket. And there's so the language here, setaket, from the green stakte, meaning oil of myrrh, the spice myrrh, M-Y-R-R-H. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba said, it is olive oil, extracted from an olive that has not yet reached a third of its growth. This acidic oil is effective as a depilatory to remove unwanted hair. It was taught in a baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda says that ampiknin is from the Greek omphakion, meaning oil prepared from unripe olives, the same idea. So Rabbi Yehuda says that anpiknin is olive oil from an olive that has not yet reached a third of its growth. And why is it spread on the body? It is due to the fact that it removes the hair and pampers the skin. I mean, this sounds like an ad on TV, but no, this is in the Talmud. This particular kind of oil from these young olives not only removes the hair, it pampers the skin. The Mishna states, this is the principle. One who violates these prohibitions on Passover with anything that is prepared from a type of grain. It was taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yehoshua said, Now that we have learned that by possessing anything that is a type of grain, one violates the prohibition against leaven during Passover, so why did the sages list these items individually? So if we have the principle, if you possess anything that has one of these 5 grains mixed with water, why do we need to list these specific products that have that property? And the Baraisa explains that the sages provided a list of prohibited foods. Why? So that one would become familiar with these items and with their names, so that it would become widely known that these foods contain a small quantity of grain. People might not have thought of that, and if they hadn't listed them specifically, people might not have associated these products with containing grain. The Gemara cites an incident that underscores the significance of familiarity with the names of foods. As in this case of that man from the west, right? So when the sages talk about the east or the west is Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, at that time ruled by Rome. And the east is Babylonia, at that time ruled by Persia. But the primary learning communities were in Israel and Babylonia, and really more in Babylonia because the Romans had so decimated Torah learning in the Holy Land. But there was still an active community in the Holy Land. So, as in this case of that man from the west, Israel, who visited Babylonia, and he had meat with him. And he said to his hosts, "Bring me a dip with which to eat my bread." And he heard them saying, "Bring him kutach." Now, he hadn't heard of kutach as something that people ate over there in Israel, but since he had heard the word kutach discussed by the sages, he stopped eating, as he knew, as we know, because we've been discussing it for a few days, that kutach, what is it? It was made out of sour milk, moldy bread, and salt. Therefore, it's melchik, it's dairy, and he couldn't eat it with something that he was having a meal that was fleshik, that was meat, right? He can't have meat and milk together, and he wouldn't have known that but for his Torah study where he encountered the word kutach, a dip they eat over in Babylonia. They didn't eat it in Israel, but he heard of it, and so he knew not to have it. This incident underscores that it is advantageous for one to familiarize himself with the names and ingredients of different foods so that he will be aware of the nature of food even if he does not recognize it. Seems to be a lesson that we've absorbed, right, in the 20th and 21st century. At least a lot, there's at least a sizable number of people who are careful with what they eat. They check ingredients. They know what's fattening, what's sugary, what's dairy, what's this, what's that. It's good. It's good that you know what's in your food. It is stated in the Mishna, these substances are included in the prohibition, but are not punishable by kares, right? So if you eat intentionally chametz during Passover, that's a severe transgression, punishable by death at the hands of the heavenly court. That's called kares, excision. You're going to be cut off. That soul shall be cut off from its people, is a way that's usually translated in English translations of the Bible. Now here we have a note from Rav Steinsaltz. Kares, a divine punishment for serious transgressions. The precise definition of the term is a matter of debate among the commentaries, with opinions including premature or sudden death, barrenness, and the death of the sinner's children, and excision of the soul from the world to come. We had that, I think it was definitely in Brachos, and then again maybe in Shabbos or Eruvin, that there was disagreement among the sages themselves as to what it means when you get kares. But it's not good. It's not good. It could be an early death. It could mean that you die before you have children. It means, God forbid, you've had children. They're going to die. It may mean that you have years cut off from your life. It may mean that you lose your place in the world to come. All these are possibilities that they argue about. Tractate Kyrisos mentions 36 transgressions punishable by kares, and all of which are violations of prohibitions with 2 exceptions: neglecting to sacrifice the paschal lamb and failure to perform circumcision. In other words, usually kares is a penalty because you violated one of the thou shalt nots. The 2 exceptions are the positive commandments to eat the paschal lamb, which we could only do when the temple is standing. We just can't, it's not available to us anymore. So we're not all subject to kares because we're not eating the Passover lamb. We haven't been allowed to do that since the temple was destroyed. But the other one is failure to perform circumcision. That's a positive commandment on on parents of a Jewish boy. On the Jewish parents of a Jewish boy. And, that's something that they must do or they are liable to kares. And I think specifically it's on the father. I'm not sure that the mother's included in that. But tonight we are going to be discussing whether women are included in certain penalties or not. So perhaps we can come back to that question. In certain instances, if the transgression was committed in the presence of witnesses, the transgressor is subject to execution by the earthly court or to the penalty of lashes, although the general principle is that when two penalties apply, only the more severe penalty applies. So that means if the more severe penalty is death at the hands of the heavenly court, the earthly court does not apply any punishment at all. Or in other cases where there is, for example, execution by an earthly court and lashes, the person only gets executed. They don't lash him and then execute him. And anyone who inadvertently transgresses one of the prohibitions punishable by kares does not get kares. If you do it inadvertently, then you become liable to bring a sin offering, as we saw over and over again in the laws of Shabbos. If you violate Shabbos on purpose, kares. If you do it unwittingly, you're liable to bring the sin offering. The Gemara asks, who is the Tana, who is the rabbi of the Mishnaic period, who maintains that both full-fledged leavened grain bread, right, so chametz, like really leavened bread, but in a mixture, and hardened leaven in its pure, unadulterated form. So these are two things that are not chametz, right? One is chametz, leavened bread, but mixed in with other things, like kutak, for example, or hardened leaven. So hardened leaven is like dough that you wanted to rise, but you kept working it for a really long time, and then it became hard. So it actually never rose all the way. It maybe rose partially, but it did not become fully leavened. It kind of came overworked, and then it just hardened. So you can't say that that's chametz. It's like dough that got stuck in the dough state and then got stale. So for these two foods, right, bread mixed with other things or dough that never became bread and then got hard and stale, who is the Tana, the rabbi, who maintains that both of these, chametz mixed with something else and hardened leaven in its pure unadulterated form, which is not suitable for consumption, are both included in a prohibition. They're included in a prohibition. Here we're saying included in a prohibition that you can't eat it and you might be guilty of lashes if you do, but not the full-fledged kares, which is what you get for eating chametz itself, bread, leavened bread itself. The Gemara answers that Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, it is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. As it was taught in a baraisa, leavening dough, i.e. dough that is at the beginning of the leavening process and is presently hardened leaven, it must be burned, or one gives it to his dog, and one who eats it is flogged with 40 lashes, right? So if he ate it, if he did it on purpose, that would be kares if it was chametz. Since he gets lashes, it's not full-fledged chametz, it's this hardened dough. So Rabbi Meir says it must be burned, or one gives it to his dog. That's if you just have it, you have to get rid of it. And if you eat it, you get lashes. Now, before analyzing the contents of this baraisa, the Gemara addresses an apparent contradiction within the baraisa. This baraisa itself is difficult. You said that this leavening dough, this hardened leavened dough that never became bread, it must be burned. You said it must be burned. So apparently it is prohibited to derive benefit from this hardened dough. And then it teaches, or one gives it to his dog. Now, if you can give it to your dog, that's not just a way of throwing it in the trash. If you can give it to your dog, it means your dog, which is your property, can derive sustenance from that dough. He can eat it. Therefore, since it's your property, the dog is your property, you are getting benefit from the dough. So if it's forbidden for benefit, you should not be allowed to feed it to your dog. Burning it would imply forbidden for benefit. Giving it to the dog implies permitted for benefit. So apparently it is permitted to derive benefit from the leaven, says the Gemara. The Gemara answers that this is what the Baraisa is saying. This hardened dough must be burned, i.e. this hardened dough as defined by Rabbi Meir must be burned in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who maintains that hardened dough is actually full-fledged chametz. Alternatively, the Baraisa may be explained as referring to hardened dough as defined by Rabbi Yehuda in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is prohibited to derive benefit from this hard dough. Each Tana maintains that it is prohibited to derive benefit from any dough classified as leavening dough by his definition. When the Baraisa says that one gives it to his dog, it means leavening dough, this hardened dough as defined by Rabbi Meir, is only hardened leaven according to Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore one may feed it to his dog. In other words, Rabbi Meir says you have to burn it. But Rabbi Meir also says, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's prohibited, but you can feed it. It's prohibited for you to eat, but you can feed it to your dog, right? So Rabbi Meir is saying, according to me, you have to burn it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you could feed it to your dog, and that's what the Baraisa is teaching. Now, with regard to the final statement of the Baraisa, that one who eats this hardened dough is flogged with 40 lashes, well, we have once again arrived at the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that one who eats this hardened dough from which it is permitted to derive benefit according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you eat it, you're flogged with 40 lashes. Now, according to this explanation of the Baraisa, we have learned that Rabbi Meir maintains that this hardened dough in its pure, unadulterated form is included in a prohibition, and one who eats this leaven is flogged. And all the more so, one who eats full-fledged, leavened grain in a mixture, right? Bread, like it became bread, but then you mixed it with other stuff, is flogged, but does not receive charis. Charis is for eating bread itself, as he is not eating the leaven in and of itself. Nevertheless, the prohibition against eating leavened bread on Passover applies in that case. Now, Rav Nachman says, the Mishna is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, as it was taught in a different Baraisa. For eating full-fledged, leavened grain bread, one is punishable by charis. Okay, we understand that. If you eat full-fledged, leavened bread, charis, death at the hands of the heavenly court. Whereas, for eating a mixture that contains leaven, one is merely punished for violating a prohibition, right? It's not the full-fledged violation, the full-fledged transgression of eating leavened bread during Passover, which is death at the hands of the heavenly court. Rather, this is that in between. It's still a prohibition of the Torah, in the Torah. Usually we say something is a transgression of Torah law or it's a prohibition according to a rabbinic decree. Here we're saying there's two levels within Torah law. Either full-fledged chametz, punishable by charis, or this other thing where it's chametz mixed with other things, or this dough that never really became bread because it hardened. That's subject to the prohibition according to Torah law, and you get lashes for it. This is merely for violating a prohibition. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say, so this is a different Baraisa, but also addressing the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say, for eating full-fledged leavened grain bread, one is punishable by charis. However, for eating leaven in its mixture, one is not punished at all. So this is a much more lenient opinion, that the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and apparently with Rabbis Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, and say that this in-between thing, the hardened dough or chametz mixed with other things, that one is not punished at all. Not punished at all. Now that's going to be subject to a rabbinic decree, Of course, it's prohibited to eat it, but you're not going to become liable to a punishment according to Torah law. And we learned according to Rabbi Eliezer, who said that full-fledged leavened grain bread in a mixture is included in a prohibition, and that it is true all the more so with regard to this hardened leaven, this hardened dough, in its pure, unadulterated form. The Gemara asks, and what is the reason that Rav Nachman did not state his opinion in accordance with the explanation of Rav Yehuda, that the Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Meir's ruling? Because it sounds like what Rabbi Meir said. And the Gemara answers that Rav Nachman could have said to you that the following distinction applies. Perhaps Rabbi Meir stated his opinion only there with regard to the hardened leaven in its pure, unadulterated form. However, with respect to full-fledged leavened grain bread mixed with other things, no, one is not punished with mere lashes, but with kares. And the Gemara asks, and what is the reason that Rav Yehuda did not state his opinion in accordance with the explanation of Rav Nachman? Right, so Rav Yehuda and Rav Nachman, these are Amoraim. These are later rabbis of the Talmudic period, arguing about what these earlier rabbis, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Eliezer, were saying in earlier generations. So what is the reason that Rav Yehuda did not state his opinion in accordance with the explanation of Rav Nachman, that the Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer? And the Gemara answers that Rav Yehuda could have said to you, Rabbi Eliezer stated his opinion only there with regard to full-fledged leavened grain in a mixture that is included in the prohibition. However, with regard to this hardened dough in its pure form, he did not state his ruling. And perhaps Rabbi Eliezer maintains that it is permitted to eat this hardened leaven. So each of these rabbis is being very careful to try and understand the earlier dispute between earlier rabbis. Well, what exactly did they disagree about, and how broadly did that disagreement, how broadly did that disagreement extend? The Gemara notes that it was taught in a baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yehuda, who said that the halacha, the law, is in accordance with Rabbi Meir's opinion. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat matzahs. That's Torah, Exodus 12:20. The sages taught, well, this verse comes to include Babylonian kutach, Median beer that's made out of dates, but which they add some barley water to, and that's why it's included. Edomite vinegar, again, that was made from wine, but so that it would sour and turn into vinegar, they introduced some barley water. And Egyptian zitom, same idea. Egyptian zitom, I think, was actually beer made primarily from grain, like our beer. And I might have thought that one who eats any of these will be punishable by kares. Therefore, the verse states, for whoever eats leavened bread, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. That's the punishment of kares, from which the sages derived for eating full-fledged leavened grain bread, one is punished by kares. But for eating its mixture, one is only in violation of a prohibition, not subject to kares. So the Gemara analyzes the above statement. Whom did you hear that said for eating a mixture which contains leaven, one is in violation of a prohibition? It's Rabbi Eliezer. However, the baraisa is not stating the halacha, the law of hardened leaven, hardened dough in its pure form. The baraisa lists only items that contain leaven in a mixture. Who brought dough into this hardened dough? Who brought that into it? We've only been talking about these items that contain, full-fledged chametz, but mixed in with other things. So this baraisa lists only items that contain leaven in a mixture, but not other substances whose legal substance is that of the hardened dough, like broth, worked dough, and glue, which we have mentioned, but not in this context. Learn from this that Rabbi Eliezer is not of the opinion that this hardened dough is prohibited. And the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Eliezer, from where does he derive the law that leaven in its mixture is included in a prohibition? The Gemara answers that he derives it as is written, you shall eat nothing leavened. The Gemara challenges this derivation. If so, if the expression anything leavened includes leaven in a mixture, well, let one also be liable to receive charis for eating leaven in a mixture, as it is written, 7 days, no leaven shall be found in your houses. For whosoever eats anything leavened, now the word anything is what they're going to focus on, that soul shall be cut off. And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Eliezer needs that phrase, anything leaven, in order to derive for that which was taught in a baraisa. From the phrase anything leaven, I have derived only that an item that became leavened on its own is prohibited. However, from where do I derive that one is punished for karet for eating an item that became leavened due to a different factor? The verse states, whosoever eats anything leavened shall be cut off, indicating that food that became leavened due to a different factor is considered leavened bread. The Gemara asks, whoa. If so, if the phrase anything leavened is referring to food that became leavened by means of something else, then when the same phrase appears with regard to the prohibition, I should explain that it comes for that purpose as well. Consequently, there should be no violation for eating a mixture that contains leaven, as apparently the phrase anything leavened does not refer to that case at all. See, they're trying to get really specific on where is the source of law that's going to define that a leaven in a mixture is a prohibition, not the full-fledged chametz that results in charis, and what about this hardened dough? And who is getting their sources from where? Where's Rabbi Eliezer deriving it from? Where's Rabbi Meir deriving it from? So rather, the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer is that he derives the law from the term anything. He does not derive his opinion from the term leavened. He bases his ruling on the inclusive term anything. And this is where we get to the question of women and whether they are obligated in the same way that men are by the laws of Passover. So here we go. The Gemara raises a difficulty. There too, in the verse that mentions the punishment of charis, isn't it written, for whosoever eats anything leavened, that soul shall be cut off? So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer requires that term, for whosoever, to include women who are also punishable by charis for eating chametz, leavened bread, during the 7 days of Passover. The Gemara asks, is this source necessary to derive this law? The fact that women may not eat leavened bread, that's derived from the statement of Rav Yehuda, because Rav Yehuda said that a statement that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. As Rav Yehuda said, that Rav said, and similarly, a sage in the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, the verse said, speak to the children of Israel. This is from Numbers 5:6. Speak to the children of Israel, a man or woman, when they commit any of the sins of men, to commit a trespass against the Lord, that soul shall be guilty. The Torah rendered a man equal to a woman for all punishments of the Torah. Since the punishment of charis for eating leavened bread on Passover is included in this general principle, there is no need for a separate source to include women. So we've derived from another place in the Torah that when there's a punishment being meted out for doing something wrong, transgressing a law of the Torah, whether it's a man or a woman, if the punishment is charis, it's going to apply equally. So now what we're asking is, well, if Rabbi Eliezer is using this term, whosoever, it's the same word as anything, kol, in this case, any, or any of the everything. So if he needs it to derive that women are also included rather than some other inclusion of who can eat or what can be eaten or what can't be eaten, so if he's using it to derive that women are included in the prohibition, the Gemara is saying, well, why does he need to do that? Women are already included in all the punishments. If a punishment is going to be meted out for a certain transgression, it applies to women the same as men. Why would he need to specify that? And now we bump into another principle, right? That women are not obligated in the same way as men in the positive commandments of the Torah, right? So there's the thou shalt nots, those are the negative commandments, and the thou shalts, those are the positive commandments. Negative commandments apply the same to men and women. Positive commandments apply the same to men and women unless it is a time-bound positive commandment. A time-bound positive commandment, for example, is you shall pray in the morning, afternoon, and evening, right? Which is not actually stated in the Torah, but the sages have derived that it is stated. It's inferred from the Torah. That's a Torah obligation. So women are not obligated to pray 3 times a day. And there's a lot of things that men have to do at a specific time, and women are exempt from those obligations, slaves as well. Why? Because in terms of slaves, it's because their time is not their own. They're commanded by their master. In terms of women, it's because they were the primary caregivers for children. And it was thought to be too onerous an obligation that they would have all the same obligations that have to be done at specific times like men if they also have the primary responsibilities for taking care of children. So women are exempt from time-bound positive commandments. What's an example of a time-bound positive commandment? In our discussion, eating matzah on the first night of Passover, right? Not eating leaven, that's a negative commandment. But to eat matzah on the first night of Passover, that's a time-bound positive commandment. So you might have thought that women are exempt from that. And that's what we're learning now. Actually, they are included in that. Women must eat matzah on the first night of Passover, and outside Israel on the first 2 nights of Passover. That's why we must eat matzah at our Passover Seders. And the Gemara, okay, so where are we? The Gemara answers, nonetheless, it is necessary to cite a source that men and women are equal, specifically with regard to the punishment of kares for eating leavened bread. Now, we just said that women are included in that positive commandment, but the prohibition on eating leavened bread during the Passover week, that's a negative commandment. So why do we need to include women in that? Women are, you might have thought to say that women are exempt from having to eat matzah, but they're definitely going to be included in the negative commandment that you shall not eat any chametz during the week. However, there's a connection between the negative commandment to not eat chametz and the positive commandment to eat matzah on the first night. And here we go. As it could enter your mind to say that since it is written, you shall eat no leavened bread with it, 7 days you shall eat with it matzahs. That's Deuteronomy 16:3. Now, one might have thought that anyone included in the obligation to eat matzah is also included in the prohibition against eating leavened bread. And these women, since they are excluded from the obligation to eat matzah, you might have thought that since they are excluded from the obligation to eat matzah, as it is a time-bound positive mitzvah, from which they are exempt as a rule, I might have said that they are excluded also from the prohibition against eating leavened bread. Therefore, the verse teaches us that women are also prohibited from eating leavened bread. And the Gemara comments, and now that women have been included in the prohibition against eating leavened bread, they should also be included in the positive obligation to eat matzah on the first night, even though it is a time-bound positive mitzvah. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. As Rabbi Eliezer said, women are obligated to eat matzah by Torah law, as it is stated, you shall eat no leavened bread with it 7 days, you shall eat it with matzahs. These 2 commandments are juxtaposed to teach that anyone included in the prohibition against eating chametz during the week is also included in the obligation to eat matzah on the first night. And these women too, since they are included in the prohibition against eating leavened bread, they are also included in the obligation to eat matzah. And indeed, the law is women are obligated by Torah law to eat matzah just as men are, as stated in the Gemara. The same rule applies to all other mitzvahs on the first night of Passover. Anything that anyone is obligated to do on the first night, all Jews are obligated to do, men and women. Okay. So good. We're almost done with the part that I'm going to read, and then I'm coming to your questions. So if you've got questions, get them in the comments now. The Gemara questions this derivation. So challenges anyone who's obligated and anyone who's prohibited to eat leaven during the week is obligated to eat matzah on the first night. Gemara questions this. What did you see that led you to understand that the term kol, anything, comes to include women and to exclude leaven in its mixture? On the contrary, say that it comes to include in the punishment of kares one who eats its mixture. And the Gemara answers, it is reasonable to explain that the verse comes to include women since the verse is dealing with those who are obligated in the mitzvah not to eat leavened bread. So it includes those who eat. As the verse says, for anyone who eats leavened bread shall be cut off. It stands to reason that the expression anyone includes additional people who are punishable by kares, not additional types of leaven, right? The word kol here, it's being translated as anyone, but it's really, it's a Hebrew word that means more like every, right? And so it might have applied to people, it might have applied to things. The question that since the rabbis are using it to derive an additional law, it is more reasonable in this context to include more people rather than more things that might be included in the prohibition. And would a verse that is dealing with those who may not eat leaven come to include additional types of food that may not be eaten? It seems to be referring to people, right? And that's where we will break off. And let me now come to your comments and questions. Okay. So, Rice, very good. Okay, Sharon Frant Brooks. I don't understand what sounds like semi-chametz. It sounds like being semi-pregnant. It seems to me that either something is chametz or it's not. I mean, for sure, either it's chametz or it's not, in the sense that it will be prohibited. But the question is it full-fledged chametz in the form of bread, which would, if you ate that on purpose, you would have that heavy punishment at the hands of the court. And it kind of makes sense, right? The whole idea is you need to eat matzah, not puffy bread, right? So if you go and eat puffy bread, you know you're doing a big wrong, right? It's a big aveira, a big sin during Passover. On the other hand, if it's just dough that never became bread, that got hard, it's like kind of gross, like, you know, got included in something else, like was made into glue and you came to possess it without thinking about it. Or you had bread, but it just became moldy and old, and then it got included in this kutak dip. It's not the same, right? It's not as bad as eating bread, right? As going full hog and eating bread, as it were. On the other hand, what we should recognize is this prohibition that we're talking about is a Torah prohibition. It's not just that, you know, a fence around the Torah erected by the rabbis. This is within the Torah. Okay, there's two levels, and one is a very serious avera that the heaven will shorten your life, as it were, and the other is you would be liable to lashes, but it's still spelled out in the Torah. That's what the sages are telling us. Chris Castile. So the Paschal Lamb is offered for transgressions unknowingly committed. No, it is not. So where we're talking about the sin offering, that's a different kind of an offering. The Paschal Lamb is the Passover offering. It can be a goat or a lamb, and it's brought it's brought in Jerusalem when the temple is standing. So the temple hasn't been there for 2,000 years. We haven't been able to bring the Paschal Lamb. But when we do, that is an offering that, even though it's slaughtered at the temple in Jerusalem, then it gets eaten by the people who are enjoying the Passover meal together. A sin offering is something else. A sin offering, so the Paschal offering does not imply guilt of any kind. The Paschal offering, the Paschal lamb or goat, is a remembrance of God bringing us out of Egypt. Redeeming us from slavery in Egypt. A sin offering is brought when we come to do an unwitting transgression of an important law in the Torah, like for instance violating Shabbos. So then when the temple is standing, we can't do it anymore. Now our form of atonement is teshuvah, right? Atonement, studying what we did wrong and resolving to do better. Tefillah, prayer, and tzedakah, giving money to charity. That's how we do an atonement now. But when the temple is standing, a sin offering is one of the types of offerings that can be brought there. There's also the thanksgiving offering, the peace offering, the guilt offering, which is different than the sin offering. And then like the offering with respect to doubt, the other offerings. And there it's like you would only bring that offering if you became liable to bring it because you did this certain kind of violation in certain circumstances and you became liable to bring it. If you do a good job and sort of mind your ways, you may never have to bring a sin offering. But the Paschal Lamb, everyone has to partake of it every year at Passover. So they're very different offerings in nature. And Sharon Frant Brooks, I always give Passover goodie bags to my kids and grandkids that include new lip gloss, new toothbrushes, and toothpaste, as well as wine and matzah and Pesach cake and chocolate. So what Sharon's referring to is what we've been learning here, right? That there are actually cosmetics that were understood to include grains, especially in the ancient world. And so this is a tradition that goes all the way back, that if you use those types of cosmetics during the year, you'd have to replace them with other cosmetics and sort of personal hygiene products during Passover, and make sure that they don't include those kinds of derivative chametz, as it were, that would be prohibited on Passover. So it's a very nice tradition that Sharon has to remind her children and grandchildren, that chametz is not only that we must eat matzah and we can't eat, sandwich bread, right? Sliced bread that comes in bags, but that there's all these other types of foods that are involved in it. And she includes wine in the goodie bag because, of course, there's an obligation to drink the 4 cups of wine at Passover. I think we'll come to that later in our journey through this tractate. So far, we've only been focusing on chametz and a little bit talking about the Paschal Lamb offering. All right, that's what I've got for us this evening. It's been great learning with you. Tonight was challenging, right? Because we didn't do the entire page. We did like the whole A side and a good chunk of the B side. But tonight, I wanted to just give that flavor of what a regular Daf Yomi class would be like, right? A regular Daf Yomi class, you do the whole page, A side and B side, straight. The teacher would certainly include notes and stuff and explanations, but you try to cover everything on the page. I usually don't do that because we can, start to really get a little bit lost in the weeds and the logic. And I'm trying to make it, accessible to all without dumbing it down and to keep it as vibrant as I can. But tonight it was worth doing that, actually reading the page and seeing how that goes. So I hope you enjoyed that. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Monday. And then Tuesday is the 1-year anniversary of AT Daily. We started on January 5th of 2020. Who could have imagined what 2020 held? We certainly didn't know on January 5th. But that was the day that I attended the beautiful Siyum Hashas, the completion of the previous cycle. Here in Los Angeles, and then the previous 7.5-year cycle, and then we began the new one, and I started teaching it on that day. And it's been quite a journey so far, and we've got this beautiful group that is, gathering regularly to learn, and you really mean a lot to me, and you give me a lot of strength to keep this going, and so I thank you and I honor you. All the best.